Hello. Hello, everybody. I am just setting up and letting everyone join. So please put up with my face for a little bit longer. I can see people's names showing up at the bottom of the screen, which is very nice. Oh,
Hi.
oh, lovely to finally meet you. Kind of, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's so great to see you as well.
Oh, how have you been?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I am okay, other than a tiny bit of Instagram Live setup drama, which to all of
Oh,
those following, you will be able to have a link to the by both bestiary, which is very important, and my second novel on this page, which I was trying to set up before we began our conversation, but I will very rudely, while Kimmy is giving a beautiful reading, be also pinning those, so you'll be able to see them then. So do not worry, because yes, the internet, a delight.
yeah. I'm glad that the drama of the Instagram Live got resolved. Very glad.
Oh dear. But yes, no, I had that sort of moment of, oh, I don't want to start the live too early. Wait, can I actually start the live?
Oh,
Here we are. Here we are. Okay. So for those of you who are already here, I can see 27 lovely people. We're just gonna wait like 2 more minutes because we want to make sure everyone can come in. But while you are, watching us, if you have any questions for Kaming that you might want to ask at the end, if you want to type them as comments or questions at any point, I will be brave about the internet and try to keep track of them so that we can ask them at the end. So I hope
thank
that is.
you.
Um,
Yeah, thank you all for joining. It's very exciting to see those notifications popping up at the bottom.
yeah. Um, So I suppose, hopefully, you all know who our wonderful reader is tonight, and that is, why you are here. But maybe some of you are just loyal Pages of Hackney followers and who know that they have excellent taste in readers. So we should talk a little bit about her. So, Tae Chang is a Kundiman Fellow, a Lambda Literary Award finalist, and a National Book Foundation 5 under 35 honoree. I am reading this because there are too many wonderful things that she has done and been awarded with, and I am bad at memorizing, but there's a lot. So, Bestiary, her debut novel, was longlisted for the Centre for Fiction First Novel Prize. I realize we're a UK-based bookshop, but you may hear from my voice, I've lived in New York for a while. The Centre for Fiction First Novel Prize is a huge deal, FYI, in America. So, you should know. She is. The bestiary was also named a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. And in the future, she has a short story collection coming out called Resident Aliens, which you can all look out for and be excited about. And so the way today's event is going to work is she's going to read for us for a little bit, and then I'm going to ask her my nosy questions, and then we have time, at least a few of you are definitely going to get to ask her your nosy questions, and then eventually we have to release her. So, whenever you are ready.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Pages of Hackney for hosting this, and to you as well. I'm such a fan of yours, and I was so excited and fangirling when I heard that you were interested in being my conversation partner. I was just so thrilled. So I've been really looking forward to this. And I also just wanted to showcase how beautiful the cover of this book is. It's one of those fold-out covers, and it has an amazing illustration of a tiger by Junhua Zhang. And I was like, I have to flaunt it when I'm on camera. So I'm going to read just a few minutes from the book. So just for a little bit of context, this book follows 3 generations of Taiwanese American women. And the section I'm going to read is from the 3rd generation's perspective, who goes by daughter. And she is in 5th grade, and she has kind of met this other girl, and they're forming a bit of a romance. And kind of in the background of all this happening, there are holes opening in daughter's backyard that are becoming kind of sentient holes with lives of their own. So that's just a bit of context. And you'll be like, what are these holes? Yeah, and I'll start reading. I wanted to taste everything native to her. I held her spit in my mouth, wondered if this is what the teacher meant by exchanging bodily fluids. We'd just begun 7th grade sex education, which mostly meant our teacher explained that the adhesive wings of the maxi pad were not literal wings and could not equip us with flight. The teacher told us to develop a platonic relationship with our bodies. On the list of illicit fluids that could be exchanged or bartered, semen, vaginal discharge, blood, but there was nothing about what we'd done. In the animal encyclopedia Ben and I memorized, every hierarchy had a name, every violence a vocabulary. Somewhere there was a name for our exchange in a language that was kept from us. I brought Ben to my backyard where the holes breathed, introducing her to each mouth I'd made with my hands. I invented a role for each hole. This one spits watermelon seeds, I said, pointing at the hole to our right. This one tells secrets, I said, pointing to the hole on our left. I still watered the holes once a week with the backyard hose, as if water alone could heal them. Have you tried feeding them? Ben asked. I said I had, but she said maybe it wasn't the right kind of prey. Maybe they wanted to hunt for themselves. I told her to forget about them the way I had. I'd learned to live around them, to skirt around the borders of their throats without being swallowed. Ben looked at me, a smudge of mud on her nose, and said, every hole corresponds to something missing. We just need to find what's gone. Whenever there was something she wanted to solve, she fingered the key around her neck, pretended to unlock her mouth with it. She gripped the pendant key in her teeth and suckled on it, thinking. I slid the key from between her teeth, replaced it with my finger, flinching when I felt her teeth. She looked at me without blinking, her mouth symmetrical to the holes. Waiting for her teeth to cleave me, I imagined my finger severed inside her mouth, twirling like a stem. Ben shut her eyes, her breath burning circles on the back of my hand. Her teeth clasped around my knuckle and then released, skimming the skin so lightly it reminded me of the time a wasp landed on my finger and sipped at my sweat. I'd been so afraid of moving, of baiting its sting, that I didn't breathe. Coaxing my finger into a hook, I twisted it slow as a key until she opened for me. That's just a little bit from that section.
That that is a beautiful bit from that section. So thank you so much. And it ties absolutely beautifully into the first question that I wanted to ask you. Oh, just a note for viewers and a note for Pages of Hackney. I'm very sorry, I have not been able to find the shopping button. Please, please, please order Bestiary from Pages of Hackney. They have it available, and they're a wonderful bookshop. Really, really.
And Starling Days, and Harmless Like You.
Thank you. And I am sure when this post is archived, those links will be pinned there. I am really, it's entirely my inability to pin things. Okay, so let us talk about the book rather than Instagram. So you begin by talking about digging for gold, and it made me think of the way in which gold often features in novels about being Chinese American, in part because of the gold rush, and that was interesting to me. But then the book went in a direction I entirely wasn't expecting, and I don't think this is a spoiler. And it becomes far more interested in holes and the meaning of holes than it does in gold, or at least that's how it seemed to me. And I sort of wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've never been asked about gold, and I'm so excited that I am, because it's funny because that original first chapter that I wrote that was about this kind of elusive gold that the family is trying to find was originally titled just gold, and I was interested in going through each of the kind of Chinese elements in the lunar calendar: gold, wood, water, fire, earth. But like you were saying, I became more interested in the dirt and the holes. What inspired first that thinking of the idea of gold was thinking of things like, oh, Gold Mountain as the name for San Francisco. And part of this book takes place in the South Bay area. So that was very kind of present, this elusive like land of wealth. And also because my mom told me a story, I think about a great uncle who buried gold in his own yard. And his kind of mentality behind it was that gold was mobility. It was the ability to leave or flee, because he was saying, like, you know, when you want to pay your passage on a boat, if you're a refugee, paper money is useless and all other forms of currency are useless, but gold is static. It's always worth something. And he would always tell me this. And I'm like, it's 2008 in Los Angeles. Like, I don't know if you'll need to ever unbury that gold. But I think that sense of gold as a kind of security in his mind, which I thought was really fascinating. But yeah, no, the idea of buried gold was always very present in my mind. And yeah, I was interested in how those holes could kind of be living things. I think we typically think of holes as very passive. We make them and then they kind of just receive things. But I was like, oh, what if these holes could kind of speak for themselves in a way, or had agency themselves, kind of like mouths. And it wasn't just this kind of passive wound. I was interested in having the land itself be this very living, alive thing that was capable of like spitting and talking and consuming things. Yeah.
No, that is very much comes through, and you do such beautiful things with that I'm actually gonna I have my questions in particular order, but I'm gonna jump around a little bit because
Yeah, of course.
that that's more interesting. And also one of our lovely guests asked a question that's very similar to one I wanted to ask, and I think is quite tied to that, the idea of the earth speaking, which is that you play a lot with form, and when the earth speaks, it speaks slightly differently, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you came to the different voices that are in this book, sort of, and was that something that happened naturally, or did you have to sort of figure out the craft elements of it more slowly?
Yeah, I mean, I love that question. I think, speaking of holes in the voices, I'm thinking a lot of the grandmother sections, which are these kind of more prose poetry sections where there are silences embedded in the text. And I was thinking again of those silences as something being alive and not just passive. Like silence not just being the absence of speech, but a kind of language unto itself, and to have those empty spaces and those gaps in your letters be very deliberate, and kind of as present as the words themselves was really important to me. And that actually came later on, because originally the letters, when I wrote them and the grandmother's voice, they were very dense and they didn't have those kind of speaking silences in them. And it actually was through form that I discovered more about the character. So it was when I began to change the format and experiment with the structure of the letters, because one of the edits I got was like, oh, how is what is this grandmother's voice basically, and how is she kind of not necessarily different from the other two generations, because they all share a certain vocabulary. But like thinking about her own motivations and her own interiority, I realized like, oh, she is someone who wants to be unknown in a lot of ways. She is someone who doesn't want to be direct, who really in some ways doesn't know her own motivations. And that was really important for me to discover. And I discovered that through playing with like the porousness of the text and the form of it. And realizing those silences and that slipperiness of meaning was really important to her as a character. And yeah, in terms of like all three of the voices coming, yeah, it's really interesting because the mother's voice felt very immediate to me. And when I was writing it, I felt like I was almost being like caught in this undercurrent. It felt very fast paced to me in a lot of ways and kind of staccato. Whereas with the daughter sections, I felt a little bit more like breathing space and room in a lot of ways, and that she had also in a way more luxury to kind of really linger on certain things and to kind of reflect on certain things in the way that the mother felt she couldn't. So it was really interesting to see, like through voice, I began to understand their interiority more. Yeah.
No, I think that's really eloquently put. And it's funny because I often my students talk about what form should I write in, because I do some teaching. And not everybody's form is character led, but I think when it works so well, because otherwise you're not just imposing some arbitrary form to be artsy, but actually it's a way of expressing how these characters see the world, which I think you do so beautifully in this book. So yes, thank
Oh,
you for
thank
talking
you.
about that.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
And okay, so sort of speaking of experimentation and books developing and editorial notes, you have these lovely acknowledgements in the back of the book. And one of the things that you mention very intriguingly is the idea that the tiger tail maybe wasn't there in an early draft. And I found this so strange because it feels so essential. And I was like, wait, how? So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I love this question too so much because yeah, I love that you found that because I'm like, yes, it's true that in an earlier draft of the maybe kind of the first draft where I was really where other people were really reading it, the tiger tail was present, but it was so brief. It was like at most 10 pages of the entire thing. Like the tiger tail was confined to a singular chapter because I think in that form the book was more like a collection, and each one was very episodic, and the tale was like barely there. It's a flash in the pan, and so was the relationship with Ben. The relationship between Jodder and Ben was also something that was kind of confined to an episode. And yeah, it was through the editorial process and conversations with Victory Matsui, who's really brilliant and talented, that I realized that the tale encapsulated a lot of the core of the themes of the book as well, of inheritance and kind of fear of perpetuating violence, of becoming a predator. And I realized that to kind of just have it be very marginally part of the book didn't quite make sense. And I was thinking a lot too of like, oh, what through lines could be possible in this narrative that is a bit fragmented. And I think that the tale, I love like the pun of TALE, TAIL, of like this tale being a through line. And I was like, haha, it's going to be funny to me because I'm going to think about like tail, and like this literal lineage. And that similar thing happened with the relationship between Jodder and Ben, of realizing that it was episodic, but only because my own imagination was kind of limited in that moment. I wasn't able to really let myself imagine a future for this tale and for this relationship. So it was like a personal journey of growth, writing out these elements. Yeah.
No, I really like that because I think often authors come to like these things and readers think, oh, this always been here this whole time. And it's, I mean, for the British audience here, the fact that Daughter Grows a Tail is so important that it's on the cover of the American edition. If anyone can hear sirens going past, I'm terribly sorry, that was me. I mean, not me being sirened, but my life. No, so and actually it's, you're so good at leading me to the next question because when you were well, talking about tail and tail and the two different types, can you talk a little bit about how you see this book? Because to me, this book, all the characters in this book, for this audience who haven't already read Bestiary, you should, is the characters are always telling stories. The mother tells story about her childhood, the grandmother tells stories, they tell legends. And so to me, in many ways, this feels a bit like a story about stories. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role storytelling has for you, either in this book or more generally as a writer.
Yeah, I remember when I finished this, I was like, oh no, I went the meta route of writing a story about stories. Like, oh no, it seems so complicated and gimmicky, and I was so afraid of that. But I realized that it was just so core and important to the book. And I think a lot about kind of matrilineal storytelling and how important it is, in my family at least, that there's this kind of matrilineal tradition of storytelling and how that's often erased from the official patrilineal record of the way we think about families, or even just like thinking about family structures and what we typically value as being part of an official narrative, whether it's like an official narrative of history or an official narrative of a family. And so I was really interested in stories that are outside of those kind of official records, and official ways of inheriting things, outside of that like capitalist patrilineal structure. So yeah, it was really deeply important that this storytelling be a space of play and experimentation, and also for the way for so that the women in the family in some ways can pass on their own histories and experiences and joys and traumas, but told slant, told through a not quite not quite literal rendering of their own histories, and the way that there's so much power in telling the story. Like even if you yourself, or even if the characters themselves often felt like they didn't have agency in their lives, by telling the story, there's a kind of agency over it that felt really important to me. And I just wanted to, yeah, be playful with that, and to also show that I feel like we typically always think that like text is authority and text is authoritative and kind of very rigid in that way. And I wanted to think more about like text as something that could be really flexible, and that there were multiple narrators kind of trying to hijack it and play within it, and that it wouldn't be so rigid in the storytelling. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for talking about that, because I think, what I just, realized that one of the things that we haven't done is summarize this book. And I feel very sorry for whoever had to blurb it, because it's a wonderful book, but it's so full of stories. It's hard to pin down one particular story amongst all of them. And I think that, it has so many important themes, and, you've touched on many of them in the answering of these questions. But, and so for those of you wondering, what is this book about? It's about everything. It's about immigration. It's about love. It's about queer love. It's about the physical world, the animal world, inherited trauma. You should read it. To pick up on one of the lines that you were just talking about, I think that one thing I noticed is that this book emphasizes the matrilineal really strongly, but, and this is, I think, is quite interesting, is the women are all really powerful. They're not always good people, but they're very powerful people.
Yeah.
And the men are there. And interesting. And I mean, I particularly love the pirate who's never been on land. You particularly fond of him. But they often seem more fragile than the women. And potentially in need of protection. And I was interested in that, because sometimes writing about matrilineal things involves a rejection of the patrilineal line, whereas this almost feels like a pitying of the patrilineal line.
I love that idea. I want to write that down. The pitying of the pitying of the patrilineal line, I find so interesting. I think I will write it down after this. But yeah, no, I was really interested. I didn't want to kind of romanticize the matrilineage in a way, to be like, oh, because this family is so kind of the women are so powerful within it that there's an absence of violence in some way, or that it's kind of utopian in a way. I think it was really important to show the ways in which they've inherited violence from the women in their lives and from the men in their lives, and how it kind of perpetuates, and are, like you said, not always great people. But yeah, I think really interesting in kind of the men needing protecting. I'm always so kind of interested in the ways in which, within this particular family, the women are asked to carry things in a way that the men don't, and how the carrying of those things is both a burden, but also this form of intense intimacy. The bond and the intimacy between these women is something that's really absent from the men in this family, and that's a horrible loss for them to not be in some way tethered. And at the same time, that tethering does come from this history of burdening and oppression. So it's kind of this interesting double-edged thing that I was really just fascinated in exploring. And also, I really love that you mentioned the pirates as well, because I have a huge affection for the pirates as well. And I was really interested in the ways that I think that they also reject a certain kind of masculinity as well, when they kind of exile themselves from land and find a new kind of belonging, and a new way of relating to themselves and their lineage that I think is also atypical to the typical patriarchal structure. So I was interested in both of those things. Yeah.
And and I that is, for those of you who have not already read Beastry, that is a very queer love story, and a very beautiful way, that I would read a whole book about,
The
queer pirate love.
pirates. It's
Really
real.
wish
It's
to.
real weird. Just a warning to any of you who are like, "Ooh, pirates!" It's a real weird pirate story.
It's so I was sort of more, maybe generally, I was wondering because, oh, we have a comment that is yay for the pirates, a little crab
Yes,
emoji.
and the crab. The crab is very relevant to that story, but I will say nothing else. Yeah.
Um, so I guess one of the questions I had for you is that, we've already talked a lot about the way in which the story novel is quite radical, and it's confronting a lot of things. It's confronting colonialism, it's confronting patriarchy, it's confronting in many ways the realist novel. And I say this as I deeply love the realist novel personally,
Mhm.
but I think that there is space for more than just the realist novel in this world. And, it's your debut. And I'm sure people have said, oh my goodness, this is your debut. How? And so I wonder if you have any advice for people who might be thinking about writing their first novel, especially about not just having to replicate sort of the sort of standard, like, literary novel. There's huge variety within the world of literary novels. I love literary novels, but I think some people have an
Mhm.
idea of the literary novel that is a particular type of, like, sad realism. Again, I love sad realism, but there is more than that. um,
Yeah, I love that so much because I'm also a huge fan of sad realism. I love a good introspective sad realism, good plot driven, all of those things. And it's the kind of thing I really admire, but I don't necessarily feel that I can or should replicate as well. But no, I love that idea of there being like possibility in storytelling and not necessarily feeling very confined. And it makes me think a lot about a book that I've read recently by Matthew Salisis called Craft in the Real World that uses examples from like Asian American literature and non-Western literature to kind of challenge what we typically think of as, a story or a novel. And I related to that deeply because I realize in so many ways when I read like works in translation that I find this very kind of deep, immediate recognition, especially when reading like works in translation from Taiwan or China. I feel this immediate recognition for that, for a certain kind of storytelling and a real like tolerance for exposition and backstory and circular narratives and this idea that you can just like it can be narrated by this person narrating their grandfather's story, like all of those things I deeply recognized, and I realized were part of my own, that could be part of my own strengths as a storyteller too. So yeah, reading translated works deep, like kind of blew my mind and helped open up so much of what I knew to be storytelling. And also just, yeah, I think learning to recognize my own strengths was something I had to kind of develop while I was doing this too. Because I was like, oh no, I should make it plot driven. I should like outline. I should do all these things. But I realized that what my own impulse was to follow the language and to let the language lead me places. And that I had to follow that impulse because those are the reasons why I write. And there was kind of no other way that I could do it. Um, and I think also like writing so much about oral storytelling is really freeing as well because oral storytelling can be kind of wild and in many, many, many forms that I think we would find very unconventional. There's just like, you just feel like anything could happen, especially in like a mythic world, like anything can happen. And that was really helpful for me as well. Yeah.
No, that's really wise. I really like that. We had an audience member question from Jessica J.
Yeah.
Lee, who is, for those
Ah,
who, yes, who is also a wonderful writer for members of the audience.
yes.
She has written up two books, Turning and Two Trees Make a Forest, and I'm sure you could also order those from Pages of Hackney. We should support Pages of Hackney. But her question is, do you feel like this idea of storytelling as flexible and perhaps oral is integrally linked to the gaps and surpluses of communication that happen during migration?
Wow, that's such a brilliant question, but I think yeah, it is partially related to that. I'm really fascinated. Like recently, I've become really obsessed with the goddess of mercy, Guan Yin, and the reason why I'm obsessed with her is because her story. She has obviously kind of mythical origins as like a bodhisattva, but it's also interesting because in many different East, Southeast, and South Asian countries, she has a different name. Sometimes she has a different gender. She has a different origin. And I'm really obsessed with that. I'm like, this deity has migrated. Has migrated and been so integral to so many diasporas and has different genders and different names and different, and I'm really fascinated by that. And I think similarly with storytelling, I'm really interested in like the mutability of that story when it travels, when it becomes shaped by a particular like context or by a particular person. And yeah, and I think the oral tradition is definitely a huge part of that. Like the I think built into the oral tradition is like the subjectivity of storytelling. And that allows for so much, yeah, possibility and porousness within it. Yeah.
That's actually really beautiful, and it's I'm going to share with the audience a personal anecdote. I hope they will forgive me.
Yeah.
My grandparents actually have the statue of Guanyin in their apartment in New York that was taken from a temple that was being destroyed. And one of the
Wow.
rituals we had when we visited them, especially as they got older, is she lives inside of a perspex box, but she's made of wood. And so we have to refill the little cup of water that keeps it moist enough in there for her. And she has become this like very physical fragment of belief that has just gone away with them. And my grandma was Chinese and my grandma was Japanese, and I didn't know even who she was, other than that she was next to the Genkan, which is where you keep the shoes, and that we watered her until I was much older. And I think, I don't know, for me, a lot of being part of a diaspora is learning the story. You feel like you're learning the stories later than you would otherwise. And I mean, I don't know if that's actually true, but it often feels true. And I think it was one of the reasons, bring it back to your novel, Bestiary really resonated with me, is that feeling of having to almost detective puzzle solve what actually happened in your family.
Yeah, I deeply relate to that. First of all, I love that idea of watering a goddess. That's like another phrase that I want to write down, watering a goddess. Oh, love it. And yeah, I think I really relate to that detective. I like to call Bestiary a mystery novel, even though I know that's a totally inappropriate use of a genre term, because I'm like, deep down, I feel like it's a mystery and that it ends as a mystery. But no, I definitely relate to that. Like, I remember when I was first writing Bestiary and I didn't know it was going to be fiction, I started writing about my grandfather, and I didn't even know his name. I didn't even know his name until after he passed. And even then, the name on his urn is not even the name that he was born with. It was a name that he changed in order to escape a political enemy and wouldn't get assassinated. And so he changed it, and he changed his age. And there's this, I don't know, there's this kind of, yeah, like what you were saying of learning things very late, and also that information sometimes being kind of irrelevant. Like, I was like, somehow his name is just, the fact that I never knew his name was never important to me. And why is it not important to me? And what does that say about, what my family values and how we interact? And that became a major seed in the book. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm gonna put you on the spot, so feel free to pass on this. But if we were gonna say like Bestiary is a mystery novel, like what would be your like dun 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 like line for it?
Oh, this is great. I love this. I would say it would be something like it would be, there's a moment in the book with a cookie tin in a in a closet, and I feel like it would be and it's like a joke within a lot of immigrant families that there's like this cookie tin, but inside the cookie tin there are no cookies. There's usually like a sewing kit or some other, like Ace bandages, I don't know, some other practical item. So I feel like the mystery dun 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 line would be like, she discovers this cookie tin that she thinks full of cookies she thinks are going to be really like delicious Danish butter cookies, but she opens it and what's inside? And then it would just be like cliffhanger, speculation. I think that's how I would lead. Maybe a very minor part of the book, but I would just enjoy kind of continuing that joke of the cookie tin.
What you mean when this inevitably becomes a Netflix special? I can imagine the like moody lighting on the cookie tin, and she opens
Yeah.
it, and we see some shapes, and it cuts to the title.
Yeah, exactly. The cooking tin, the bottom of it just drops out, and it turns out just like a tunnel straight into the earth or something. That would be wild.
Clearly, if someone from Netflix is listening, you should pick this up
Yeah,
right now.
the cookie tin mystery.
Let me check our questions, because people have been asking them, and I realized I could just bug you about your book all night, but you know, I should ask. Okay, so a couple of people have asked what great books we've read recently, but I was thinking we would leave that till the end as a sort of treat. Not a treat to talk about your novel, but I one of our questions was about the folklore and sort of how you found inspiration in the folklore. And I might add a PS to that. Like, were these versions of stories or twists on stories you heard growing up, or were they things that you came through reading and research? Could you, talk about folklore?
That is a great question, because when I first drafted Bestiary, I did no research. I did absolutely no research. I was like, oh, I remember this story my mom told me on the bus. I remember this story my mom told me. One of them is the Hugelpo story that becomes one of the main stories of the book, which is about a tiger spirit who eats the toes of children, and she calls the toes peanuts. And I thought it was just because my mom really liked peanuts and she likes eating peanuts. And I was like, oh, that's really funny and hilarious, that detail you made up. I mean, it's supposed to be a bedtime story, which is super ironic because it's terrifying. It's terrifying to go to bed thinking of like a tiger spirit coming to eat you. But then when I ended up doing research on where this myth came from, it's a Fujianese myth that became a Taiwanese myth. I realized that like the peanut toes are like canonical. It's like canon peanut toes. And I was just so mind blown. I was so charmed by it. I thought it was grotesque and hilarious. And I also think it's hilarious that it's become a Taiwanese children's story, because there are no tigers in Taiwan, at least that I know of. I don't know if maybe tigers swam across the strait, but they're native to the mainland and not necessarily to this island, to this kind of detached island. And so I think it's so fascinating that a story can become quote unquote nativized in an environment where that animal is not even really, you know, present or quote unquote native. And I was so fascinated by that. And I was like, oh, what does it mean for this story to have immigrated into a new context? And so that was really fascinating to me. And then other stories are ones that I feel like are classics, like the story of the Gourd Girl that my mom told me growing up, and I'd seen it in like picture book format, and there were always different versions of it. But there are always things about the story that I either wanted to, that felt strange and that I wanted to like interrogate further, or that I would always argue with family members about. Like I remember with the Gourd Girl story, it was about this gourd that is between two families' estates. And the two families fight over who gets the gourd. And the gourd actually hatches a daughter. And the two families are fighting like, oh, what should we name this daughter? She should have our family name. No, she should have our family name, because they're arguing. But I remember arguing about this story with my family, because I was like, oh, but she's a daughter. It doesn't matter whose family name she has, because, you know, growing up, I've always heard, you know, a daughter is, you know, as useless as throwing out a tub of water. Like she becomes part of this other lineage. What does it matter what she's named? And I was like, oh, it's so interesting that in this story, she has a kind of value and power over these families, and it matters what she's named. So I was like, okay, I have to write about it. So the myths and the folklore that I tended to draw from most were the ones that I felt like I was in conversation with, where I wasn't just like, oh, that's a great story, or I don't like that. It's where I'm like, I need to investigate this element for myself. Like, I don't understand. And I think out of that sense of doubt and uncertainty, something generative happens. Yeah.
I really like that, because I think sort of retelling fairy tales or folklore, it's, you know, there can be this huge pressure either to sort of make them new for no reason, just like Cinderella, but on roller skates.
In space.
And, you know, and I feel like that's especially true of sort of Western folklore. And then I think, I know for me, when I'm writing about like folklore that I know from either Japan or China, that there's a huge pressure I put on myself to say, oh, but I'm like representing this, and I need to find the true version of it, even though actually the more research you do, the more you find out that people in this village have this version of it,
yeah,
this village have this version of it, and there isn't in fact a single true version. And so I love the idea that you're in conversation with it, you're not presenting it as the authorized version of
Mm-hmm.
Tiger Toes, but instead like within a shifting truth. And I think by putting them in your book, which so much has sort of conversations about what is true, what is not true,
Mm.
that works really beautifully. And I hope it just makes people want to go and find more versions of those stories.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, um, so, so, one of the other questions was how you find the experience of writing a novel versus writing poems. So I'm a
Oh.
dedicated reader.
Oh, this is always such a great question, and my answer is always not great. I think my process for writing poetry and prose are often very similar in that I'm trying to like accumulate language and I try to let the language lead me. I think the difference is that I tend to be a lot harder on myself with poetry because again every line, and not that every word and line of prose isn't incredibly important, but I think I have, because for so long I really was like, I'm only ever going to write poetry, I'm never going to write a sentence, like ugh. And because of that I put a certain amount of pressure on myself that I feel like in prose I feel a little bit more released from that. And I actually kind of learned to love writing again through writing bestiary, because I felt like a beginner and an amateur, and I felt like, oh, I don't really know what prose is, so I can't really do it wrong. So it was kind of rediscovering, I think, the pleasure of writing through prose again. And then hopefully with poetry, I can learn to be a little bit less hard on myself and have these like inflated expectations. Yeah.
Do you think, other than in your heart, which is obviously very important, but the having worked on prose, when you come back to poetry, it will change the shape of your poetry, or do you think they'll be there
Mm.
on separate streams?
That's really interesting. I think it's so, I always joke to people too. I'm like, for some reason, whenever I try to write a poem, it becomes super narrative and like 17 pages long, and for the first draft. And then whenever I try to write prose, it's like fragmented, non-narrative, short. And it's really interesting. I think I always have, no matter what kind of form I'm in, I'm always trying to get away with writing against it in some way, or maybe my brain needs to somehow do that. So I think it's really interesting. I think returning to poetry and like leaning into the narrative aspects of poetry that we don't typically usually assign to poetry. I think that'll be really interesting. Yeah.
Well, I had a comment asking if we could link to your poetry, which obviously we want to do, and I will do my best to figure this out, the technology part afterwards. But I was wondering if you could talk about where people can read your poetry.
Yeah. I think probably easier than Instagram Live, because I also don't know how to pin how to pin things or show links on Instagram Live. I have a website that's just kamingchain.com, just my name, and there's like a section on the website called poetry. You could just click on it and it has some links to like my most recent poems. Yeah, and everything's on the website. Yeah, for ease and convenience.
So that is very good. And thank you for letting everyone know that. And we will try to put the comments down below. So I think if people have any last comments, they should think of them. But maybe we will now talk about where our someone has kindly put.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
It's Michaela, who's my UK editor, who's really brilliant and wonderful. And I forgot to thank you at the beginning. I was like, oh, I meant to do that, and I completely forgot. But thank you for being here, and she's so wonderful.
But yeah, so I was one of the questions that we've been asked twice in the comments, and also, wanted to ask you anyway, is have you been reading anything lately that you've been really enjoying that you would recommend?
Yeah, this is a great question. I recently started reading a book called Strange Beasts of China. Beasts, always coming back to beasts. Can't escape the animal. Strange Beasts of China by an author called Yan Ge. And it's translated from Chinese, and I'm reading it, and it's already one of my favorite books. It takes a lot of, to me, it kind of feels like, if anyone's read like the classic of Mountains and Seas, I think is what it's called in English, where it's kind of written in a nonfiction style about all of these beasts. And yeah, I just love that this kind of takes a launching off point from that, but is its own brilliant, wonderful narrative. I also started reading, oh, Milk, Blood, Heat by Dantiel Moniz, which is a short story collection. I'm currently working on a short story collection right now, so I'm always like hunting for short story collections and reading all of them that are coming out because, yeah, I just think it's so brilliant, and I'm always inspired by people writing in the short fiction space. I'm very impressed. Yeah. What about you?
Well, I did really enjoy Dantiel's book, so yes, and it is coming out in the UK, or it may already be out. And if it is, we will definitely also link to that here so that you can buy
Yes.
it from Hackney.
Brilliant.
And because yes, her editors kindly sent me a copy to read. And the other book that I have been reading that I feel like everyone I know has already read is Luster by Raven Leilani. And you may have seen the huge amount of press for this book. It is very funny and very delightful, and and it's wonderful on New York and on being young, and it's also political, and yeah, and it has some sort of hilarious and disturbing sex scenes, which not everyone will be into, but made me laugh. So you can
Uh,
out if it seems like your sort of thing. I realized we have. I wanted to ask you a question though about your reading short story collections and research
yeah.
writing on, because I think a lot of writers sort of, they write a short story, they write another short story, they write a short story, they okay, do I just wait for these to accumulate into a collection? And which is fine, that really works for some people. But I was wondering, when you're looking at collections and the way they're put together or the way people build a series of stories, is there anything that you have found particularly useful or inspiring, in case anyone watching should want to write a short story collection?
Yeah, I love short story collections. I think it's that poet in me also who loves who loves poetry, and who I feel like they're kind of structured in really similar and interesting ways. I mean, I've heard it compared to like structuring an album as well. So like poetry collections, short story collections, albums, sharing really interesting ways, I think, of um, ordering work, of having work be in conversation with each other, of having like thematic resonances. But also, I feel like every short story writer has their own kind of envisioning of a collection. Like I remember reading Otessa Moshfe's Homesick for Another World and being like, whoa, the disparity between like the first story and the last story is incredible. Like they feel like they could be in 17 different books. And I was like, you know what? That's a way to do a story collection too. And then other short story collections of having really strong thematic resonances are really interesting, or like Lost in the City by Edward P. Jones, where there are links, but they aren't explicit links. So if you read them, and it's also ordered from the youngest protagonist to the oldest protagonist, which I loved so much. And I was like, wow, so it really is, I feel like every one of these collections has an ecosystem unto itself, and they're all doing different things. Like some are chronological, linked, not linked. I mean, that's really inspiring to me, because then I'm like, oh, then it could kind of be anything that you want, as long as it has your own kind of intention and vision behind it. And now kind of plotting my own, I'm like, what's going to be my vision of what this could be? Yeah, it's so interesting.
I have just now figured out how to pin comments, which while I was listening to you,
Oh,
which I realize is very annoying, but they are now pinned for people who are watching this in the future, because you will be able to rewatch all the wonderful things that have been said tonight, should you think, oh, I wish to study this further. But no, thank you so much for the short story writing advice. My mother keeps telling me I have to write a short story collection, and I keep going, no. So I would.
that is so funny. I love that your mother keeps telling, because my mother keeps telling me to publish a children's book that we conceived of together when I was little, but that might have ripped off every children's book that has ever been written. Our idea is, because my mom loved telling me the story of Momotaro when I was little. The boy born from the peach who like kills the village monster, and he doesn't have a belly button, and the monster only eats belly buttons. I realize now that there's like a familial fixation with monsters eating parts of children. So that's a thing. But when I was little, I was like, okay, I think I was like 7 or 8. I was like, what if it's hamster in the ham? So instead of Momotaro, the boy born from the peach, it's going to be about a hamster who's born from a ham, and he goes on all of these adventures. And we wrote this together, but we ended up kind of taking every single like Grimm's fairy tale that we knew and like inserting it in. And she's like, this should be your next project, Hamster in the Ham. And I was like, hey, maybe Hamster in the Ham has its potential.
I mean, I love that. I also love mothers as sort of like stage mothers are one thing, but literary mothers, they're behind. No one sees them, but they can be really there. Also, the world might need Hamster in the Ham. I don't know. That sounds delightful.
Hamster and ham. I thought it was just so clever for thinking of that because I was like, there's the word ham in hamster. Has anyone noticed that? Well, I'm about to show you. Thought it was like the most brilliant pun.
We've learned that puns can cause great literature.
Tail. Maybe you're right. Maybe everything just comes out of puns, and that's just my craft is just puns. Yeah.
You do some other things pretty well as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. So if anyone in the audience is going, oh my God, I didn't type my question, you can type your question because I do have a final announcement other than support Pages of Hackney, which, is very important. But also Pages of Hackney are supporting Sister Space. And this event was free, but if you've been here this whole time and you've enjoyed it and you want to donate the price you would have paid for a ticket, which, for reference, can be around £8, but you could also donate much more to Sister Space. That would be really, really kind and lovely. And I know that there are going to be more details about that that you can find. Sorry, the thing that I was reading from has gone black, which is super helpful. But I wanted to make sure that you could do that. This is a very delightful time. So yes, but if does anybody have any final questions? Because you're about to lose an amazing author.
I also just wanted to say thank you so much to Harville Secker and Vintage Books for letting me take over this Instagram account. I was very nervous about it. I was like, I don't deserve the access of this password on this account. It's too much power. It's too much power. But yeah, I'm very grateful to be on this account and to have spoken with you. It's so exciting. And thank you all for also being here and listening as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And before I close out, I just wanted to read to you a quick description of what Sister Space do, which is they were founded in November 2015, and they're a community-based nonprofit initiative created to bridge the gap in domestic abuse services for African heritage women and girls. So that's a pretty important cause. So if you felt able to yourselves donate the cost of your ticket to them, it would be really, really appreciated. And also please buy any and all books mentioned in this from Pages of Hackney. They will deliver it to you despite, so yeah, we'll come to your house. Bye. And I love this. And you were just a joy to talk to. And I feel like I have so much to go away and think about now.
Yeah, I have so many things to write about. Pitying the patrilineage is definitely going to be one of those things that I write down. So brilliant. And thank you so much for your thoughtful questions. They were so wonderful and invigorating. And I hope you all have a great rest of your evenings.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.